The UN Security Council was established in 1945 to avoid a third world war between global powers. Historically, disputes between powerful states has led to catastrophe, and shifts in influence have proved disruptive. By mid-century, three powers, the USA, China, and India, will likely be more powerful than any other. All three have nuclear weapons. Yet India, despite its huge population and increasing economic weight, has no permanent seat on the Security Council. Europe is overrepresented, whilst Africa and Latin America don't have significant representation compared to the permanent five. The UN Security Council has contributed immensely to the absence of global war. Wars have not ended, however, and the potential for global conflict between nuclear states could still result in disaster for all of humanity. Only a strong, legitimate Security Council will be able to forestall a repeat of the events that led to the First and Second World War. The Council should undergo comprehensive and structural reform to serve our new interconnected world. Get behind the call for a legitimate and effective UN Security Council.
Peacekeeping is more challenging in the age of terrorism. Evident in peacekeeping missions that the UN Security Council has authorized in Mali, the Central African Republic, or Afghanistan. Mandates are increasingly robust, requiring peacekeepers to operate in warlike environments. Yet member states often do not provide sufficient troops, equipment, or finances. Currently, most large troop-contributing countries such as India are not members of the Security Council and have little influence over missions. Instead, mandates are largely crafted by the permanent five members who themselves provide limited blue helmets. Disagreements regarding the interpretation of mandates result in commanders in the field deferring to national headquarters in their home countries rather than UN structures. Missions mandated by the UN but implemented by regional organizations such as the African Union in Somalia, AMISOM, are not provided with sustainable finances. The Council should undergo comprehensive and structural reform to serve our new interconnected world. Get behind the call for a legitimate and effective UN Security Council.
That is also why the United States supports increasing the number of both permanent and non-permanent representatives of the Council. This includes permanent seats for those nations we have long supported and permanent seats for countries in Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean. The United States is committed to this vital work. In every region, we pursued new, constructive ways to work with partners to advance shared interests, from elevating the Quad in the Indo-Pacific to signing the Los Angeles Declaration of Migration and Protection at the Summit of the Americas, to joining a historic meeting of 9 Arab leaders to work toward a more peaceful, integrated Middle East, to hosting the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit in this December. As I said last year, the United States is opening an era of relentless diplomacy to address the challenges that matter most to people's lives, all people's lives. Tackling climate crisis, as the previous speaker spoke to, strengthening global health security, feeding the world. We made that priority, and 1 year later, we're keeping that promise.
U.S. President Biden's recent call for this UN family to defend the rights of smaller nations as equals of larger ones must not only be applauded, it must be uploaded. As African member states, we do not wish to gather here next year with no progress made on the African Union's Zuluan consensus, which demands that 2 permanent seats with veto power and 5 non-permanent seats must go to Africa. So, following the strong signal of support from the U.S. government, we expect to see this matter on its way to the United Nations Security Council to be tabled, to be heard, and to be settled. That is the UN we want. That is the UN the world needs. a reformed UN that practices the equality and democracy it preaches, a reformed UN that is not constantly polarized by nuclear power, stuck in Cold War mindsets, a reformed UN that uses its multilateral muscle to give equal attention to the interlocking issues of public health, food security, insecurity, climate change, and conflict, regardless of where they emerge or who they affect. A reformed UN that gives equal weight to all its members who give it meaning, not just those who give it money.
I remain firmly convinced that the challenges that have come so sharply into focus in recent years and months emphasize the call by Nigeria and many other member states for the reform of the Security Council and other United Nations agencies. We need more effective and representative structure to meet today's demands that have since outgrown a system designed for the very different world that prevailed at its foundation in 1945. Change is long overdue.
The world is in a state of turbulence with intersecting crises growing in scale and severity, including climate change, food price inflation, conflict, and uncontrolled migration. These challenges all require multilateral cooperation and efforts, yet the perception that the international system is no longer up to the task has only deepened, particularly where the interests of powerful members are at stake. In the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, recent setbacks have served to highlight that the security situation is fundamentally no different than it was 20 years ago, when the largest and most expensive United Nations peacekeeping mission was first deployed.
For their own political advantage. And the United Nations Charter was not only signed by democracies of the world, it was negotiated among citizens, dozens of nations with vastly different histories and ideologies, united in their commitment to work for peace. As President Truman said in 1945, the UN Charter, and I quote, is proof that nations like men can state their differences, can face them, and then can find common ground on which to stand, end of quote. That common ground was so straightforward, so basic, that today 193 of you, 193 member states have willingly embraced its principles. And standing up for those principles, for the UN Charter, is the job of every responsible member state. I reject the use of violence and war to conquer nations or expand borders through bloodshed, to stand against global politics of fear and coercion, to defend the sovereign rights of smaller nations as equal to those of larger ones, to embrace basic principles like freedom of navigation, respect for international law, and arms control. No matter what else we may disagree on, that is the common ground upon which we must stand. If you're still committed to a strong foundation for the good of every nation around the world, then the United States wants to work with you. I also believe the time has come for this institution to become more inclusive so that it can better respond to the needs of today's world. Members of the UN Security Council, including the United States, should consistently uphold and defend the UN Charter and refrain from the use of the veto, except in rare, extraordinary situations, to ensure that the Council remains credible and effective.